morning, everybody. Welcome to Conversations on Critical Operations. Today we're going to be talking to Larry Shutzberg. He's the the Executive Vice President of Information Technology at the Rank Group Ltd. Good morning, Larry.
Good morning and good afternoon to everybody.
Great. And I'm Nick D'Orazio. I'm a media producer here at OSIsoft. At any point, if you have any questions, please just enter them into the live chat on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, just double click in the lower right-hand corner, open it up in YouTube, and chat away and ask your questions that way. Larry, can you go ahead and start by just telling us a little bit about the Rank Group?
Okay, the Rank Group is a private equity out of New Zealand that owns half a dozen global businesses around the world, primarily in the packaging industry, but also we have some consumer products and the like.
Okay, and what do you do?
Oh, I'm responsible for all the strategic commercial relationships in IT and digital transformation. I kind of facilitate a lot of the digital strategies around the businesses and work with all of the CIOs and partnering for IT strategy and, again, digital transformation strategy.
Okay, so who would you say then are your customers?
Well, I mean, my customers are all the constituencies that I help. So I work with the CIOs, the CFOs, and the CEOs of all of our global companies, and their customers are therefore my customers.
Okay. And if I understand correctly, there's some of the businesses, some of your businesses are doing something new with the PI system that involves discrete manufacturing. Can you describe that?
Well, certainly. We have process industry like all of the customers that are online with us today. We've been using Pi data in our paper mills going back over 25 years. I've been a Pi customer for 30 some years. In the last couple of years, we started to leverage Pi in our converting operations. So we are deploying the Pi technology in over 50 of our converting facilities across a couple of our global businesses. And we're taking the lessons that we've learned in process industry and applying them as quickly as we can in the discrete job shop industry.
Okay, and it's not something that people are real familiar with in discrete manufacturing, right?
Yeah, data historian has not been historically used per se in discrete manufacturing. The opportunities by comparison are smaller, but they're still rich. They're harder to get at. Process industry starts with process control. The technology becomes vital to the business. In discrete, you're really looking more for business insights, and trying to apply them as much as possible for process control, but it's not the same game.
Okay. And how do you go about, I mean, this is in some cases, making use of real-time data is a big investment. How do you convince people who haven't seen it in discrete manufacturing, how do you show them that this is worth the effort?
Well, we've done a couple of things. First, we have used some outside consultancies that have helped us with just evangelizing what the potential benefits are. But we've also demonstrated our experience in the process industry side and showed them real life examples of how we were able to take data and turn it to dollars. And so at the end of the day, it is a selling game. It's a storytelling game, and it's convincing the executives and the ownership of these companies to invest in ways that they might not even be sure what the outcomes might be. They're just hopeful.
Okay, and this is something that, I mean, when working with real-time data, if you're working in continuous processing, you're probably familiar with the PI system, but that's not necessarily the case in folks in discrete. Is that right?
I would say largely Pi is new to a lot of our engineers, but surprisingly, we've had several of our engineers come from the process industry side, and when they hear that we're rolling out Pi as a tool, some of them are elated.
Okay, cool. Okay. Well, I know when you worked at, we've heard you talk a lot about your work at Rock 10 and at Evergreen Paper. And one of the things I thought was fascinating is that you found opportunities where real-time data could make huge differences in terms of money, and that was the impetus for getting a digital transformation done. It was just a fascinating story. Can you go ahead and describe that process?
Yeah, well, both at Rock 10, which now does business as WestRock, and at Evergreen Packaging, which is still one of our private equity companies, uh, the opportunities were the same. We had gobs and gobs of data historian data, real-time series data used for process control, but we were more reactive in nature. We really exposed the possibilities across our entire workforce about how we could take that reactive mentality and turn it to preventative, go into predictive, and even proactive, where we can take years of data, rich data, provide context and dimension of the data, and actually develop business insights that actually changed our outcomes and had long-lasting impact on EBITDA. And so we've had those use cases now for many years in our paper mills. And both Rock 10 had them, and we certainly have experienced it at Evergreen Packaging.
All right, and I mean, you've described a process in which you had to have an evangelist. The evangelist had to see the value, and in many cases, you found the value before. I mean, you found value in things like, well, I remember you were describing at Evergreen, in one of your previous presentations, you described it at Evergreen, I think it was at $5 million a month in EBITDA, or was it 50 million a month in EBITDA that you found you could improve just based on better use of real-time data? And
Well,
that was the impetus for starting the transformation?
yeah, well, for Evergreen, again, we've been using Pi data for 25 years. What we showed the leadership of Evergreen was that we can use that same data and extract millions. It is in the millions, and we can look at things like energy. We can look at how equipment is running. We can look at how we make pulp in the paper mills, and in fact use data to provide insights in ways of which we could actually change behavior on the mill floor that in fact has materialized into recurring EBITDA savings in the millions.
Okay, but if I understand correctly, I mean, you realized that that was available before you had implemented anything, right? The first step. Take me through what the first step was in getting, you described so well what a digital transformation will look like, and there was a first step that seemed so pragmatic to me. It was so common sense. It's like we're leaving money on the table, or this is the impression I got. Is it was a no-brainer to actually do something where an evangelist, who could make the case well, could say, there's really no reason we shouldn't do this. But am I oversimplifying it, or?
Well, I need the listeners and the viewers to understand I'm not an engineer and don't have the experience of engineering. However, back in the days when we started this in Rock 10, our whole mantra was the fact that we had all of this data, and there was no way that we couldn't take literally hundreds of thousands of points of data and study them in ways that we can learn from business that up until that point was just based on tribal knowledge. And so we used data even back again at Rock 10, where we were looking and studying chronic downtime and going back, I call it time travel, in understanding what were the confluence of events back then that actually led to the chronic downtime, and how could we anticipate when the confluence of those events would happen so that we could prevent them from happening. And sure enough, in one paper mill, we reduced downtime by 30%. That's millions of dollars in savings. Electricity was it's a very high cost item in making paper. We had a paper mill in Alabama that was using steam and electricity. Electricity was variable cost in nature. Well, if we could use data to determine what the cost was and find the inflection point of when it was actually better, less costly to use steam, why not? And so I think early on, I partnered with the leadership of the mill, who understood the manufacturing process, and together we discussed the possibilities, the virtues of how do we actually take data, turn it to information, turn the information to knowledge, change behavior, and ultimately result in dollars. It worked. And once it worked, we were able to then show examples, and it was important that the leadership has to actually allow for change management to happen, because the technology is easy, the data is easier, but the real hard part is changing in a sustainable way the workforce to think differently on how they use data to drive better decision making. So we've done that at
Okay.
Evergreen Packaging. Again, a couple of examples where we've actually made millions, and now we're taking those examples and trying to find rich opportunities in our converting operations. And I'm happy to say we're
Okay.
finding them.
Nice. So, describe the role of the evangelist in all this, because the and were you the evangelist? Did you have two evangelists? What kind of a person needs to do that? So you've got in your pocket this information that this is something that we have the potential to move on. What do you do with that information? What's your next step?
Well, I will say this. It is important for any organization to have one or more evangelists. I have had the privilege of serving in that role for a couple of organizations, but I've also sought out partners. So I can't do this alone. And I found leaders within the business that could help, who actually had not just the purse strings, but also the wherewithal to control what got done and what didn't got done, what were the priorities. And once the belief was there, once we could actually change the belief systems, it was easier for the rank and file to follow suit. It was easier for them to realize this was not just a program of the year that was going to go away. And so we then focused a lot on not just explaining the possibilities, but also the change management process. The fact is, this technology can be very threatening. It is by its nature, it's disruptive. And so if you don't actually address that early on, whatever gains you'll make will not last. And so the role
Okay.
of the evangelist is to tell the stories, to make sure there are believers, but also to make sure that change management occurs, that there's a systemic change in the organization, and the impact to EBITDA is long lasting.
Okay. So where do you suggest people start making those inroads? So do you start at the top? Do you start at grassroots? Do you do a proof of concept? I guess you mentioned it already. You talked to leaders, right? Can you describe that?
Yes, it's difficult to start at the bottom and to grow a true sustainable transformation effort. It doesn't mean you only start at the top. It just means you can't rely on a bottoms-up approach. So I think you really have to have a top-down approach where you are leading from the top, that it is widely visible, it's core to the business strategy, it is widely communicated and not just once, and people realize this is not an option. It's the way of doing business. Now, at the same time, it helps if you have a ground-up grassroots approach that can latch onto it. And that's where real magic happens, when you actually have a cadre of folks that are on the ground, that are actually doing the work, that can make things happen and demonstrate victories early. And they then
Okay.
support the leadership in their journey towards, manufacturing excellence and their journey towards transformation. So I won't say there's a menu and there's a formula for how it happens, but I would say that from my experience, you really have to take this approach where leadership is driving, but grassroots has some quick victories and it sticks.
No, and that's what surprised me when I heard you speak about this. Is you were like, yeah, at grassroots. Well, yeah, maybe, but you need leadership at the top, because I mean, there's a lot of engineers. The political game is just something they just they're clueless, right? So, but this sounds like very pragmatic advice. You have somebody who can empower you to do a digital transformation. You've got the metrics backing you up on the dollars, but you need grassroots as well.
Yeah, I'll tell you the importance of the top down. I'll give you one a real life example that's happened time and time again for us. In our paper mills, we have engineers that have been around for 40 years, and we have engineers that have been around for 4 months. Okay, the transformational change can come from either of those camps and anywhere in between. Yet traditionally, these are fiefdoms. These are tribal knowledge led. And so if you don't have senior management that breaks down the barriers, that allows the young and uninformed of the way we do things, but also allows the tenured, more experienced people to try things that are new, then all of a sudden you will have command and control, hierarchical, and you will suffocate some of the greatest creativity that's available.
Okay, cool. And now there's a lot. The way you describe this sounds like cultural issues abound in this, and you've done a number of different things to try to get past those cultural issues. Can you describe that?
Oh, certainly. In the days when we started, even back in Rock 10 days, we established recurring discussions with the leadership of all paper mills, the division, and we created a competition. And we basically said, you know, there are no rules to this. We are looking for value. And anyone that can demonstrate value such that we can leverage, we had 13 paper mills at the time. I think today they might have 36. If we could demonstrate leverage across those mills, there was reward. There was financial reward, incentive, but more than anything else, there was expectation. The same was true at Evergreen Packaging. We said, look, we've got a couple of paper mills. We understand all the reasons why things cannot happen. We're not interested in the cannot. We're only interested in the what can you do. Well, this has to be led by the mill management. And in fact, it has been. And then slowly but surely, people realize this is the way we're going to work, and it catches on. And once it catches on and becomes a systemic part of culture, there's an untold number of opportunities where the cash register could just keep ringing. Just keep ringing the cash register, more money to the bottom line. You'll never stop.
Okay. So what's the role of IT in all this? How does IT figure into, I mean, in this case, you are in the IT world and you've been the evangelist. If somebody is in the OT world and they're the evangelist, what's the role of IT in getting a process like this going?
Well, I'm going to answer that in two ways. First, I'm going to tell you that I've never considered myself in the role of IT. So I'm always considered myself in the role of just making money. Now, if I happen to work in the IT department, that's fine, but my purview's always been company-wide, and it's always been focused on operations, business processes, and IT enablement. Now, that's not always true for different organizations. The role of IT is to allow for all the friction between IT and OT and the friction between technology and results to be eliminated, dissipated. It's like laying the highways and the on and off ramps, laying the technology, making all of the perfunctory technology pieces work so that the operational technology folks do not have to worry about infrastructure. They don't have to worry about network connections. They don't have to worry about bandwidth. They can worry about operational data and turning data to dollars. Now, that said, we had a PhD for 5 years in the IT department serving the mills of Evergreen Packaging. That PhD could. So because he could, he did. So I never looked at him as an IT person. He just happened to be on the IT payroll, functioning as an OT expert, working with the mills and turning data to dollars. There's no rules. There's nothing wrong with that. The important thing was we stopped the us and them mentality. And this isn't every company I've been associated with. There is no such thing as us and them between IT and OT. There's one group of people looking to accomplish a goal. Who's got the skills? What does it take? Let's get it done.
Okay. And, you know, when you talk about IT and OT and that relationship, I've heard you describe that there can be overlap. The overlap can have, well, if you don't handle it well, then you get all kinds of churn, all kinds of, you know, working at cross purposes. Can you describe some of that, some of the dangers of that?
I give you a great example. I like the question a lot. When you're in, I've worked with engineers now for most of my career, 30 some years, and engineers, they want to get things done. And as a group, I would say they can be very impatient. They don't want to wait. So they want to get things done, give me the tools, and get out of my way. Well, that works in solving problems. IT in general, and we are generalizing here, IT folks I find, are trained and disciplined on the role of scalability, bringing things to scale. So if you allow engineers for a single paper mill, for instance, solve a problem, how can you then solve the same problem in all of your paper mills if you don't have scalability built in mind? So that we just talk about master data. If you're collecting hundreds of thousands of points of data and every mill is calling them something different, and they've built different what they call asset frameworks and different event frames, then you have lost the opportunity to leverage lessons learned from one mill to the other. IT as a profession is in the business of building scalable, leverageable solutions. So it's a great example. If you've got IT people involved with OT people in master data management strategy for data historian software, I think your results are going to be better long term.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciated your observation years ago that if you don't do it right, then OT creates its own little IT, or worse, IT starts doing OT stuff. So I mean, there's a lot of potential for because, as you said, as you described, the OT's more interested in results, IT more in scalability. Then you get these parallels that just can persist in an organization. Anyway, I thought it was a fascinating insight into what's. Yeah, I'd heard the ITOT convergence, ITOT,
we don't talk about it
issues
anymore
for years. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, we don't. But you put a human face on it, because that's a fight I've seen many a time. I mean, one of the funny things about what we teach when we teach the Pi system, for years and years we would ask people to raise their hands. Okay, you're all Pi system managers. How many are you from IT? Exactly half the class would raise their hands. How many people from engineering? So it's always been this: when you're working with real-time data, you're working with two distinct groups. It's just a perennial when you're talking about this software. Okay. Anyway, so we are just real quick change of subject. Anything else you wanted to add about that? Because I wanted to change the subject drastically for a second here.
Let's change it.
Okay, so we are increasingly at OSIsoft, we're doing things on edge analytics for things that we require quick turnaround. We are doing things for in the cloud for advanced analytics, with high value applications that are doing advanced work. Because that's required as well. And what's your take on? I mean, those are two relatively new technologies, kind of the technologies of the day. What's your take on them and the value of them?
So I have a strong opinion on it. Doesn't mean I'm right, but I will say it's almost like any portfolio of research and development, R&D. You can't bet everything on new to the world. Okay, new to the world has incredible potential value, but the probability is extremely low. Okay, whereas proven opportunities in technology, I can hit singles, doubles, and triples all day long. That to me is the difference between edge and cloud. There are opportunities to use cloud technology, predictive analytics, even natural language generation and big data to extract virtues and value from data that nobody's even thought of before. Those opportunities exist. But for us we have yet to tap the unlimited potential of technology that's always been there. So I want to do both, but I want to do it in proportion. I want to go after all the opportunities that are available to me that are proven that just within the four walls of my manufacturing locations. And yes, I can compare and contrast mills, mill data, and I can look at converting operations, but I still want to focus on just local opportunities for a preponderance of where the opportunities are, because that's where the money is right now, immediately available, higher probability of success. In the meantime, it's okay to look for those opportunities where can we do something really draconian, really new to the world, that involves cloud technology, that involves predictive and AI that no one's thought of before. I'm up for that. I'd like to bring in some outside expertise, some experiential knowledge that we wouldn't have to help us understand that. But if you look at the amount of investment and the amount of time that's just on proven technologies and opportunities, it's prudent on most companies, I believe, to spend most of their time inside the four walls.
Okay, great. Great. Well, I appreciate that. So one of the things you have described in selling Pi, or selling just the concept of making use of real-time data, adding context, adding structures. One of the things you've described is that when you add context with something, for example, like AF, Pi Asset Framework, then people can, you bring value to it. I know a lot of folks on first blush, they hear the idea of context and their eyes glaze over. What do you mean context? How's context? What is context and what is it doing to the value? And I know one of your favorite slides, let me go ahead and bring it up here. One of your favorite slides was to describe the this before and after picture of this just pool of data that's completely unorganized, permeates in an organization. And then after, of course, with a structure like AF, you've got some regularity to it. You've got some way of navigating. You've got some way of contextualizing it. So how would you describe exactly what that context is? What is the value of adding context?
All right, this is like a layup in terms of ease of answering that question, because I've experienced it now in every part of my journey. I had this in spades at Rock 10. I experienced this at Evergreen Packaging. That slide that you showed was our existing experience at both Rock 10 and Evergreen before we started looking at Pi for strategic enablement. Okay, we had 120,000 points of data collection in one of our paper mills, and they all had nice, long, unintelligible labels, numbers and letters. 120,000 in an Excel spreadsheet. Now, when I first talked to the engineering team about that list, I said, well, how does anybody know what these are? Well, we've worked here for years. We know what it means. We've got built-in language. Well, how does the new person start? They started last week. How do they understand what that means? And it wasn't necessarily hierarchical. It was a long list of 120,000 points of data collection that you could sort. That's it. What Asset Framework does is it illuminates that data. It takes this data that's just a morass of ones and zeros, and context allows you to bring in visuals and labels, create bills of material. Look at data not as ones and zeros, but as pieces of equipment. Look at the paper machine. Look at the head box on a paper machine. Look at a gear on the head box on the paper machine. Look at different compartments, all in English, slicing and dicing, and be able to draw on what are the points of data collections graphically that I can draw on when I have that context. Okay, then what if I were to actually bring some financial rigor? What if I were able to bring some SAP, we use SAP data, and saying, well, as I'm running a product, it's not just a product I'm running. What's the value of that product? What's the margin? What's the revenue level? So I'm not just treating the same pieces of data that I'm measuring across products the same. I'm starting to provide some context that says when I'm running this product, it's so much more valuable if I get a higher yield than when I run that product. All of these decision points, when you start to layer in flavoring and illumination and clarity, you then expose the entire world of decision making to the new guys, to engineers that have been here for 40 years, and I'm now not worried about what does everything mean, and I can start to think at the speed of thought. And I can start to play with data, and I can start to, as I said, I like to call it time travel, to go back 3 years and see what happened at a moment in time. That's what data historian allows you to do. You get to time travel. It's the next best thing to be in there. So I'm able to look at 5 different chronic downtimes and see what's the sameness of those 5 different events. And I find there's a confluence of maybe 5 different variables that were all out of kilter, that all cause chronic downtime. And now I can start to build intelligence on, give me some alerting, give me some understanding of when I start to reach those critical points so that I can prevent the event from happening again. None of that happens without first providing a structure of data that is easy to consume. So, I mean, I could talk about this one topic for a couple of hours. I won't bore our viewers, but I can tell you, this is the keys to the kingdom.
Okay. And now you mentioned alerting, but alerting is in and of itself just an enormous topic. Well, describe what the issues are when alerting isn't done right.
I can speak to this topic because we've experienced this, even with outside consultants coming in, helping us. We have one business that put in IIoT, Industrial Internet of Technology, underpinnings with data historian. We're collecting thousands of points of data on the plant floor. We built no less than 5,000 different alerts. And the organization, when they did a report out to management, were very proud of the fact that they had made all this progress. And all I could think about during that session was the boy who cried wolf. Okay? When you are inundated your workforce with alerts and they're getting pinged left and right, you tend to turn a blind eye. You don't hear it anymore. So I think what we talked about with the management team and even with our consulting group who understood the technology very well was that we really had to build an alerting strategy, a hierarchy of alerts. Not all alerts are created equal. So what are the 3 to 5 most important alerts that have the greatest potential impact on EBITDA? And make sure that those get delivered to a different group of people, and maybe with a different sound or a different vehicle or a different mechanism. So we start to think about alerting in ways of layering. And then how can we actually take some alerts and actually automate the responses? So instead of alerting somebody to take action, why not just do a preventative maintenance work order in SAP automatically according to certain business rules? Well, you can do that if the master data of your data historian software and the master data of SAP are synchronized. So again, it gets back into data structure, hierarchies, scalability, alerting strategy, structure. Now, all of these things I'm saying, it may sound like overwhelming components, but the truth of the matter is they exist today whether you know it or not. If you just take a step back and look at it, this is the way to
Speaking of the structures, speaking of the structures, though, for somebody that doesn't have the investment of a full structure defined in a system like AF, for example, how do you recommend they go about doing? Because that's a lot of front end building before you get any return. Describe what's a good process of trying to get that in place.
It is. I can share with you the process we used at Evergreen. I had mentioned in one paper mill we had 120,000 points of data. Those 120,000 points of data are not all built into our asset framework today. We took a business problem that we were pursuing, and we said, what are the points of data important, germane to that business problem? Let's put that in an asset framework. Let's contextualize and dimensionalize that data as best as we possibly can, and let's see if we can turn data to dollars just with that. And sure enough, we did. And then we said, okay, we now have a basis. Let's standardize and scale that asset framework. Let's add more the next business problem, and let's use the same kind of structure and standards, and over time your asset framework begins to build. And then you still have a number of tags and pieces of information that are not necessarily built into your asset framework, but eventually you'll get there. And frankly, if we never get there, I'm okay as long as we keep making millions.
Okay, great. Well, that's great. Hey, what have I forgot to ask you? Because I think we've gone over a lot of material, but I'm sure I may have left something out. I had a bunch of, please indulge me. I have a bunch of just a lightning round that I want to ask you some silly questions. But what have we forgotten to talk about? that you think would be useful to talk to somebody who's sitting on the fence or thinking about doing it, trying a digital transformation? And you've been around the block several times with this. What did I forget to ask you?
Well, we didn't really talk specifically about stickiness. We talked about the importance of change management, but there's a real lesson learned about stickiness. And I can tell you, we struggle with that even today. So what I mean by stickiness is we go in and we prove out a technology. And we go in and we actually impact EBITDA. We went into a sold out plant, okay? And we put data historian technology in. And we put alerting technology in. And lo and behold, we demonstrated a 17% increase in productivity in that one plant. That's real, sellable, new product that we're able to build due to productivity. We went to the second plant to roll out the same technology. And something peculiar happened in the first plant. We lost the improvement to EBITDA. We went back to the old ways of doing business. We went back and looked at the plant, and some of the devices that were there were just collecting dust. So it goes back to this concept of change management. I can't overemphasize the importance, okay? We proved out the technology. We had consultants, we had a great team, we had management bought in, everyone was there. But when we went to the next plant, the workforce returned to their old behaviors. So the importance of having measurement systems and accountability systems and understanding how do you make change stick is the only way that you can have sustainable value, long-term value that's accretive to earnings.
Okay. Well, good. I'm glad we got to that. Thank you for that. Thank you for all your time. Hey, let me ask you this quick lightning round. So, what's the most challenging type of packaging that Evergreen? Because I know Evergreen's in packaging specifically, and Rank Group does a lot more than that. But I'm just kind of curious. What's the most challenging? What's the thing with the tightest tolerances? What's the coolest product they make? Or is that something?
Yeah.
Is that something?
I mean, I couldn't tell you. We're fortunate enough at Evergreen Packaging to do a lot of food products, food packaging, and so we're central businesses in this tough day and time. I would submit to you that they think they make a lot of cool products. Virtually everything they make is pretty cool.
Okay, yeah. Well, I put you on the spot. Okay, next one. What's your best advice for somebody who wants to go into management? Like you've gone into management. What's your best career advice?
At some point, all managers face this inflection point where you kind of feel like that you can do the job better yourself than getting other people to do it. It's not true. As a manager, you have to find out how can you get lots of people to do their job better than you. And part of that is losing sight of the fact that it doesn't have to be exactly the way you would do it, as long as you can get a lot more done that's good enough.
Okay, great. What about if you want to stay, what's the best career advice if you want to stay technical?
I, for one, have never cared about the technology. I've always cared about what the technology can do. So while I think it's okay, and I applaud all the folks that want to stay technical and know how to do it, there's always somebody coming at us fresh out of school, even technical school, undergraduate, graduate, masters, that's going to know far more than what you've ascertained and learned in your entire career.
Okay, cool. Okay, do you have a piece of broken equipment or a fried motherboard or something that you keep on your desk as a memento?
I do not.
Okay. What's the first computer you ever used?
Well, I mean, technically I played the game Pong from Atari. I think that was a computer, technically.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. Let's see. What technology has come and gone that you miss?
I don't miss.
For me, it's the phone. I can't stand the new digital phones. I can't stand them. They all have noise gates. It bothers me. Anyway,
Nick, I don't miss any technology in I just believe in not living in the past.
Okay. Cool. Okay. I love this question, but what's the coolest calculation since we all work with data, what's the coolest calculation or bit of code that you've ever done?
Well, I had a long flight to India once. It was a 17 and a half hour flight. It was the longest flight I would have ever taken, and I was worried about being bored. So I challenged myself to build an Excel model without macros that solved Sudoku puzzles. And I did it in 17 hours and 10 minutes. So I had 20 minutes to spare, and sure enough, it's a 54 megabyte Excel spreadsheet, but it works like a charm.
That's very cool. My goodness. Okay. How many passwords do you estimate you have to type a day?
I don't. One. I have a
Really?
password manager. I highly recommend
right.
it. Now, in today's day and
Okay.
age, not having a password manager is insane.
Okay. Cool. Now, at one of our conferences during a fireside chat, you had said, you just mentioned in passing that black liquor is very, very important in paper making. You said, I don't know what that is. It's just, but apparently it's important, right? And it was like, it's so funny because you know, working as the EVP of Information Technology, have you had like thousands of conversations with earnest engineers who are explaining your process where you're desperate to say, look, I don't need to know those details. I ask you this because you're in a very interesting situation, very similar to what we have at OSI. I mean, if I had a quarter for every time somebody's explained their process to me, and it's like, you know, I appreciate it, but anyway, so is that your experience?
Well, in fairness to the engineering community, I have that same problem with IT people. So I often want to cut to the chase and just tell me the facts, give me the basics, the cliff notes, and I find that just in general, people like telling long stories.
Okay, well, that's good. I think that's the case, yeah. Okay, Larry, thank you so much for taking the time. We did not get, let me just double check, see if we had any questions. No, we have a friend saying great insights as usual, Larry. Thank you. And I'll thank you as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. And everybody that joined us today, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I'm Nick D'Orazio. See you next time.